Hey everybody, how is it going? So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sources. I'm talking about sources. So we are at a section now where we're going to really begin working on putting the next section of our research part together and work on finding some sources for our exploratory project. You've already got the first part down where we did the narrative part of the paper, and now we're going to work on the second part, which is getting the research together and getting the sources together. You remember in the chapter 22 when you looked at the granddad piece. Remember the piece where the young guy Brian was talking to his granddad about dementia and Alzheimer's, and had that nice little narrative piece when he went to visit the old folks' home, and was a real detailed part where he walked in the old folks' home and nice little story. Met with his granddad, right? Very, very detailed, very, very descriptive. Had a nice little dialogue with granddad, right? Met with his girlfriend, or talked about his girlfriend, showed him the picture on his phone, all that kind of stuff. And after that became a very researched part of the story when he began to tell his granddad about Alzheimer's and dementia. And in that part of this essay, you can go back and look at the beginning of chapter 22. I'm not going to do it here. You can do it later, but he had to look up stuff by finding sources about dementia and Alzheimer's. And that's what we're going to be kind of focusing on this week because that's what you're going to be doing, depending upon what your topic is. You're going to be finding sources about your topic. So, how did we do that? How did Brian do that with his dementia type information? Well, he had to find sources. He had to find sources. So, how did he do that? Well, he had to look stuff up, quite frankly. And, so the task for us today is where did he look that stuff up? Where did he look that stuff up? Well, there's different places to do it. There's different ways to do it. And the way to do it is, well, there's a couple different ways. And in your textbook, it kind of talks about it. Chapter 48 in your textbook talks about different ways to find sources. And there's lots of different ways to do it. Again, chapter 48 talks about it. And there's a couple different ways, a couple different types of sources. Um, we use here a couple different types of sources. We call them um, really scholarly sources and popular sources. Most of the sources we use are going to be scholarly sources, um, but you'll be able to use popular sources as well. And you'll remember in this particular paper you're going to be using, you're going to need to use four different sources. We're going to use at least four different sources for this paper. Four sources. Um, Remember, one source is going to be a an academic source, and another source is going to be a personal interview. So remember, you're going to be interviewing somebody. And then the other two sources can be, general internet type sources. We call those popular sources, right? You can just Google something, right? Go online, just kind of Google, like, I don't know, social media and anxiety or I don't know, breast cancer or whatever. You can just kind of Google it. But for the most part, we're going to be looking for, academic, scholarly type sources, sources that we know are credible, sources that we know are really factual, that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's talk about that. How do we find our sources? Well, the first thing you want to do is we want to make sure that we have good keywords. Again, this is all in chapter 48 in your textbook. I've got links to it. So we want to start with good keywords. And so where do we get those keywords? So it all starts with keywords, right? We talked earlier about, your topics, right? We all have really good topics. Sometimes they're really general topics. I remember I noticed on a couple of your topics, some of them were kind of general. I made little notes on some of your topics. These are really good topics, but, kind of maybe focus them a little bit. How do you, make sure you kind of zone in or focus in on some of your topics. Well, the same is kind of true with keywords, right? Um, this is an example of fracking, for example. Fracking. I don't think anyone's doing a topic on fracking, but in the text it talks about, for example, um, fracking, for example, which I think is pretty popular out here in the Midwest. Not so much where I come from, but I know only a couple things about fracking. Maybe fracking, Midwest, natural, right? You can see like a gazillion different keywords. These are keywords. So if you were to do a search on fracking, right, you want to try to come up with as many keywords as you can for whatever kind of search you do. The more keywords you have, obviously, the more detailed your search can be. And so searching using effective, detailed keywords can really, really help your search. And so the text kind of talks about, coming up with good keywords. Um, Again, the more keywords you can have, the more detailed and narrowed and focused your uh, search could be. And here you can see kind of an example of just lots and lots of keywords having to do with fracking. And some of these I've never heard of, right? EPA study, I would have never thought of these chemicals testing, draft regulators, whatever. Anyway, one of the other things it talks about, just in coming up with keywords, you can even do like an AI type generated search for keywords. And I know sometimes we'll kind of bag a little bit on doing AI stuff for college type things. But in some things, AI can actually be good, right? Obviously, you don't want to do AI to generate an essay for you or anything like that, but having AI, say like even, Chat GPT or something to generate keywords for uh, search terms or something can be really, really helpful. So, like for example, say you're just trying to come up with search terms or keywords for something like fracking for whatever your topic might be, maybe even like social media. What are some search terms for social media or I don't know, prisons or whatever yours is. It could be really helpful. So like for example, right, like this guy here is doing fracking, I'm sure he probably didn't come up with all of these terms himself. Like who knows all this for fracking? So he did like a chat GPT search for fracking. And if you were to just type in like, you know, chat GPT, what are some good keywords for fracking? You'll get like a result that looks like this, you know, water contamination, air quality, noise pollution, all these things. And this could be really, really helpful if you're just trying to come up with keywords. And a little bit later, I want to show you, where you can go to get some really cool scholarly articles and things like that just by using keywords. So if you're struggling just to come up with search terms, right, you might, and later on, when we start really getting into finding articles, some of you might struggle with, well, I've got a really good topic, but I just can't find anything. And the key to that might be something like keywords, just coming up with search terms or keywords. So maybe trying something like getting into Chat GPT, which sometimes gets a bad rap in college, but using it for something like just coming up with keywords can be really, really helpful. So, keep that in mind. Keep that in mind, right? The more keywords sometimes you can come up with for searching things like articles or things like that can be helpful. Okay. So the articles themselves, right? You're looking for articles, you're trying to come up with articles. Where do you go? What kinds of articles are they? Well, as I mentioned, right, there's a couple different kinds we use um, for our sources. I mentioned like scholarly and popular articles. Well, I said scholarly articles, academic articles are usually the best. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of these two articles. So the first one I'm going to show you is a scholarly article. And there's an example of one here on page 486. 46 in your text is an example of a scholarly article. It looks kind of like this. So they look a little bit different than but if you were to just Google something, just go into Google and call something up, right? This looks a little more complicated, a little more complex, a little more dense, a little more, you know, a little more smarty pants, right? Is that a word? And so you can see a couple things here, right? You can see a couple things, and then just kind of point some things out. You'll see kind of these little blue annotations on the side, and I'll just kind of go over some stuff here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but so what are some of the things unique to these scholarly articles? Again, most of what you're going to be using might have this type of scholarly academic article. Well, first, so you'll see, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but maybe I'll highlight some things. Hopefully they'll be able to see them. But just like the names, where they're published, right? It's published in, you can see it's published in an academic journal right here at the top. Hopefully you can see this. You'll see that it's published in this thing called JRes Pers, whatever that is, but right at the top left, you can see exactly where it's published. It's got like a DOI number. It's got all this information, says exactly where it's published. At the top, you'll see, a kind of official looking where it comes from, all these little numbers and reference points. That's really, really important. You usually don't see that in normal internet sites. Even the title, notice the title. That's going to be important here in a second, right? Look how the title's formatted. Sounds like a narcissist, colon. There's a subtitle next to it. Sounds like a narcissist, colon. Behavioral manifestations of narcissism in everyday life. And then there's a couple of authors here even, right? Nicholas S. Holtzman, Simon, whoever, and Matthew, somebody else. Several authors involved. Several authors published this thing. There's some links to who the authors are, copyright license information, just all this kind of stuff. Underneath this, there's something called an abstract. Something called an abstract. You know what an abstract is? An abstract, it's like about a paragraph long. You can see it. Let me see if I can highlight it. Yeah, I can't do it. I'm gonna go back one. That abstract is this paragraph right underneath there. That it's usually about a paragraph long. What an abstract is, right above the abstract, you can see these page numbers. I don't know if you see at the top there, in that top published information. You'll see these paragraphs. I don't even see it. It says 478 to 484. So it's about a 6-page article. What that abstract is, it's a paragraph that basically summarizes this entire article. So where it says, little is known about narcissists' everyday behavior, the goal of the study is blah, 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 blah. So that abstract is summarizing this entire 6-page article. Now, oftentimes you're gonna call up a scholarly article that might be, I don't know, 40, 50 pages, like a lot. And so these paragraph abstracts can be really, really helpful to you because rather than reading through a 50-page article, this little paragraph can summarize the whole thing without you having to read, 50 pages of really scientific, detailed, really dense scientific gobbledygook. You know what I mean? So it can be really helpful just reading the abstract. The abstracts are very helpful. And you don't see those, like I said, on normal, internet CNN type stuff. So those are helpful. And then underneath that, you'll see how the research came to be, right? You'll see the people who helped research it. You'll see the keywords underneath it, that might have been used in the search, right? Those keywords we were just talking about. And then underneath that, you'll see some of the research methods that were used to come up with this study or this article, which is very, very helpful. And then underneath that, you'll see, okay, so remember this article was published by those 3 authors, that Nicholas guy, the Samin guy, and the Matthias guy. So all these articles will have the contributor or the author's credentials. So you can see, okay, these 3 guys, they're Nicholas. He must be a pretty smart guy with a name like Nicholas. Anyway, his information, he came from the Washington University in St. Louis. The next person came also from Washington University in St. Louis, and then the Matthias guy came from the University of Arizona, U of A. And then at the very, very bottom are even more references, right? All this stuff came from You can see where the more information was published. Some of the facts came from, you know, some quotes came from more journals, right? Stuff's been cited from even more journals. You see those references at the bottom. So everything is cited, everything is documented. Every fact in here is documented, referenced, cited, right? All these, everything is noted in facts. All, credentials are here. Just all sorts of stuff is fact checked and fact checked and documented and all that kind of stuff, right? So that is we call like a peer-reviewed. When I say peer-reviewed, right, it's been written by several people. So, it's like people are cross-referenced and all this kind of stuff. So that is an example of a good scholarly academic source. Okay. So a lot of the sources that we're used to seeing, right, when we do our, reports and papers in high school and stuff, might look like this. So here's an example of a popular source. Same kind of topic, right? Narcissism and stuff. So look at these examples here. Look at these examples. Let me get this out of the way. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I'm just going to move this here real quick out of the way. If I can. Okay, so a couple things here. First, look at the title. Look at the title. Well, even at the very top, it's you can see a itty bitty run there. You can see it. It looks like it's a website or an article. It says basically just says health. I don't even really know what that means. Maybe it's a general interest magazine. Maybe it's a who knows the article, the annotation says it's an article from Business Insider. Okay, so I guess that tells us a little something, but just by us seeing health, we don't really know for sure. But even the title itself. So remember the title on the other one, how detailed it was. This one here doesn't look as formal. It looks a little more like kind of like sensationalized, almost like it's just it's not quite, it's a little more informal. Three types of narcissism and how they affect behavior according to mental health experts, kind of more provocative, it says, right? There's certainly no abstract, so we don't really know what this article says. We pretty much have to read the whole thing to find out what it's talking about. And then the author. So this author is a person named Julia Naftulin. Um, We have no idea who this person is. We have no idea who this person is. It could say Nick DeMeo. It could say, could be anybody. Could be anybody. Popeye the Sailor Man. We have no idea who this person is. Could be an expert. Could be an expert in narcissism. Could be anybody. Could be anybody. We don't know. We don't know. Um, and then there's other things in here too, right? Right. Remember the last one had all these credentials, several peers involved in the publishing. This one doesn't really have anything. And then the writing itself. Um, notice notice a lot of the claims that are made. While most people fall on the narcissistic spectrum to some degree, some have full-blown narcissistic personality. An estimated 6% of the population is diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, NPD. So you notice there's no statistic or there's no citations here, right? There's nothing. I mean, it's kind of like one of the first things that I would think is like, well, says who? There's nothing. There's no facts that back that up. Um, how do we know, right? Again, this person could really make up anything. They could say an estimated 96% of the population is diagnosed with narcissistic personality, and we wouldn't know. We wouldn't know. There's nothing in here that says that that's true. We just don't know. There's no facts. We just kind of have to assume that this person is kind of, telling it like it is. Um, in addition to NPD, mental health diagnosis, only trained professionals can give, right? Again, people involved have a failure, and here's a quote here, a failure of healthy science of self that leads to an overinflated. Dr. Elizabeth G. Lauren sounds professional, but again, who is this person? Again, academic experts cited, but it's not documented anywhere. There's no works cited list anywhere. Again, a works cited list. We're going to get into that a little bit later. Um, remember that other article I showed you had that references list. We don't know who Dr. Elizabeth G. Lauren is. Might as well be like Dr. Phil. We don't know who this person is. Toldhealth.com. Again, what do we know about this? We just don't know. The point is, we don't know any of this stuff. We don't know. We're just kind of assuming that this author here is completely credible, and she might be, right? They might be. All of this stuff could be true, but the fact is, we don't know. We don't know. And in this day and age, that kind of stuff is really, really super important. Really, really super important. So just kind of keep that in mind. Later on, we're going to talk about credibility kind of stuff. There's a document you're going to find on Blackboard, kind of like what we call a credibility test, little things that you can sort of almost like a checklist that you can check off to kind of see, okay, well, who is this person? When was it written? Uh, is it biased? Is it not biased? Things that you can kind of check. I mean, all right, we're never really going to know, but is it more credible than not, right? Even though we don't really know for sure, there's things that you can kind of always check um, to feel better than not, right? So we're never going to know 100%. I mean, even on the scholarly articles, and there's always sort of some kind of questions, but certainly scholarly articles are much more reliable than not. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's why we say it's always best to have academic articles than non-academic articles. So you kind of see the difference there. Okay. All right. And then another source that you're going to want to think about is, oh, no, I'm stuck. Why am I stuck here? Is the personal interview. So I mentioned before that, right, of all your sources, you've got the academic source, the scholar, the academic source, the scholarly source, academic/scholarly source, the popular source, and then one of them also has to be the personal interview, right? So depending on what your topic is, again, if it's something like, say, oh, I don't know, if it's social media and the problems that social media has in the classrooms these days and what it's doing to college students. Maybe you'd want to interview, I don't know, an instructor, or maybe you'd want to interview somebody in the class that you think it's really affecting, or maybe a school counselor or something, or maybe how uh, cancer is a problem. Maybe you want to interview an oncologist or a person struggling with cancer. I mean, you got the idea, right? You're going to have to interview somebody. So there's lots of really good information on this. On pages 499, um, it talks about, what to do for interviews. So this is make sure you take this seriously, right? We call this field research. Personal interviews, think of that as an academic source, right? Later on, next week, when we talk about citing and quoting and acknowledging sources and stuff, there's a lot involved with this, right? As far as like crediting these types of sources, how you actually integrate these conversations and quotes and passages within your text. So this is going to be really important, how you actually consider this kind of stuff in your essay. So when you're thinking about your interview, um, think about preparing for the interview, before the interview, during the interview, after the interview. And as I said, toward the back of this chapter, it talks about, how to prepare for the interview, during the interview, maybe taking notes, always asking, open-ended questions, not closed questions, like, don't ever ask yes or no questions, those kinds of things. Um, so there's really good stuff for you at the end of the chapter that you might want to talk about. I also included, let me see if I can get out of this. Let me just show you a couple things here. Um, in Blackboard, let me see if I can find it here. In Blackboard, in this module, you will see I've also included some interview strategies for you. So if you open this up, you will see, it comes up here, it's a pretty big file. Come on. You will see, this actually came from a chapter in a book, but it talks about, how to handle interviews, how to prepare for them, maybe coming up with questions, scheduling the interview, maybe the person with whom you'll want to interview might, not be close by. Maybe you want to do an email interview, but it also talks about, preparing the questions. Um, setting up the interview, what to do after the interview, maybe, talking with them afterwards, writing things like thank you notes, little things like that. Um, but that stuff's all really, really important too. So consider that the interview's very important. There's actually a project for the interview that you'll see, during the week. And then one last thing really quick, when we were talking about the interview, I'm sorry, talking about the sources, way at the bottom of your course shell, you will see something that says institutional resources. I just want to point this out to you. When we were talking about how to find your academic sources, your scholarly sources, you're going to see something down here. I don't know if you've seen this before. It says EBSCO. It's going to see EBSCO. And this is where you're going to want to play around and find a bunch of your sources, your academic sources. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but you're going to want to play around with that. This is where there's another video that's called EBSCO, Finding EBSCO Sources. Our librarian's going to walk you through a video on how to find EBSCO sources. This is where you're going to find a bunch of your scholarly articles. There's tons and tons and tons of stuff out there. And you can spend literally, and you probably will spend lots and lots of time in finding articles related to your topic. So I won't bore you with that. I don't know a lot. Well, I can help you with it, and I probably will help you with it, but I'll have Rhoda, the librarian, talk with you about the EBSCO stuff in the video that's right underneath mine here in the video section called the EBSCO databases. So Rhoda will tell you about that, but this is where you will find your EBSCO resources here in the institutional resources module, which is the very bottom of our course. Okay. Anyway, so hopefully that will help you with the sources section here in this chapter. Okay. All right. Certainly, if you need anything, let me know. I hope you enjoy this week. Things are going to start getting crazy next week. I'll just warn you now, but lots of fun stuff coming ahead. All right. So thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you have a really great week, and we will chat with you all soon. Take care.